Penelope Rivera clutched the carefully wrapped remote-controlled helicopter as she stood outside the gleaming glass doors of Grandview Event Center. At 68, she had weathered many disappointments, but nothing had prepared her for this particular humiliation. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is family only," the security guard repeated, his nameplate reading David as he consulted his clipboard with professional detachment. Through the pristine glass, Penelope could see 200 guests celebrating her grandson Leo's 8th birthday. The elaborate party featured a castle-shaped bounce house, professional caterers, and live entertainment, a celebration that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. She had contributed $2,500 toward this extravaganza, money carefully saved from her modest teacher's pension. At the center of it all, 8-year-old Leo laughed with pure joy while his mother, Sophia Chen Rivera, glided between guests in a designer dress worth more than Penelope's monthly budget. Sophia accepted congratulations on the absolutely gorgeous party with practiced grace, playing the role of devoted mother and perfect wife. The irony cut deep. Penelope had helped fund this celebration but wasn't allowed to see her grandson blow out his candles. "There must be some mistake," Penelope said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'm Penelope Rivera. Leo is my grandson. I helped plan this party." David shifted uncomfortably. "I understand, ma'am, but you're not on the approved list. The instructions were very specific about capacity restrictions." Capacity restrictions? For a venue clearly hosting 3 times the approved number, with guests streaming in continuously while she stood locked out. As she walked across the parking lot toward her modest sedan, past other guests in their party finest, Penelope reflected on how dramatically things had changed. 5 years ago, when Marcus first brought Sophia home from a company networking event, everything had seemed so different. 5 years earlier, Sophia Chen had been a marketing coordinator at a tech startup downtown, living modestly and taking the bus to save money. She was respectful of family traditions, often arriving at dinners with homemade Vietnamese dumplings and listening intently as Penelope shared stories about raising Marcus and the neighborhood's history. "Your approval means more than any expensive ring, Mrs. Rivera," Sophia had said when Marcus proposed. "Family is what matters most." The wedding had been modest but joyful, with Sophia's immigrant parents flying in from California, where they'd built a successful restaurant business. Penelope had been genuinely happy for her son's future with this humble, hard-working young woman. 4 years ago, when Miguel died suddenly of a heart attack, Sophia had been the first person to arrive at the hospital. She'd stayed through the night, handling funeral arrangements while Marcus fell apart with grief. Her quiet efficiency during the family's darkest hour had proven her invaluable and deepened Penelope's gratitude. 3 years ago, when Leo was born after a difficult pregnancy, Sophia faced the stress of unpaid maternity leave and mounting childcare costs. Penelope had volunteered for regular babysitting and occasionally helped with baby supplies. "Just until I'm back full-time," Sophia had promised, keeping careful records of expenses and treating the money like loans rather than gifts. 2 years ago, the startup faced layoffs, reducing Sophia to part-time hours. Penelope increased her support daycare assistance, Leo's clothing, family groceries. Sophia's gratitude seemed genuine, always providing receipts and emphasizing the temporary nature of the help. 1 year ago, Marcus received a promotion requiring longer hours and occasional travel. Sophia quit her job to become a full-time mother. With Marcus's blessing and Penelope's financial support to ease the transition, throughout this progression, Penelope had contributed approximately $47,000 for what she understood were Leo's needs and various family emergencies. The requests were always specific, always temporary, always for the family's benefit. But sitting in her car outside the event center, watching the celebration she'd helped fund through glass doors, she wasn't allowed to pass. Penelope finally acknowledged what her daughter-in-law Carmen had been trying to tell her. Something was fundamentally wrong with this picture. The modest marketing coordinator had transformed into a woman who maintained an expensive lifestyle while claiming financial hardship. The grateful daughter-in-law, who'd once insisted on contributing to family dinners, now excluded Penelope from major family events. The careful record-keeper, who'd provided receipts for every expense, had become evasive about how money was actually being used. Carmen Rivera, Marcus's older sister and a pediatric nurse, had been documenting concerning observations for months. As a single mother living on a nurse's salary, Carmen understood financial constraints intimately, which made Sophia's lifestyle improvements particularly suspicious. The professional car detailing every week, the expensive gym membership at an upscale facility, the weekly nail appointments at high-end salons, the designer coffee habit costing $15 per visit. None of these aligned with a family living on one income and requiring regular financial assistance from an elderly relative. Marcus works hard, but the math doesn't add up. Carmen had warned during recent family gatherings. Someone maintaining this lifestyle has money coming from somewhere, and it's not his salary. When Carmen raised these concerns with Marcus, he'd become defensive, accusing her of jealousy and inability to accept his wife. But privately, Marcus was beginning to notice discrepancies: household bills lower than expected, budget discussions that seemed oddly vague, financial patterns he'd been too trusting to examine closely. Now, excluded from her grandson's birthday party while watching through glass doors, Penelope understood that the time for willful blindness had ended. The woman she'd trusted with her money, her family relationships, and her access to her grandson had been systematically manipulating all three. Carmen Rivera arrived at Penelope's house that evening carrying a thick manila folder and wearing the determined expression she typically reserved for difficult cases at the pediatric hospital. As a nurse with 15 years of experience, she'd developed an expert eye for recognizing when something didn't add up, whether it was a suspicious injury in the emergency room or financial patterns that defied logical explanation. "I've been documenting everything, thanks," Carmen said, settling into Penelope's kitchen chair and spreading receipts, printed screenshots, and handwritten notes across the worn wooden table. "Look at this timeline of expenses versus lifestyle improvements." The evidence was methodical and damning. Carmen had tracked Sophia's spending patterns with the precision of a medical professional building a case for suspected abuse. Her nursing salary required careful budgeting, which made her acutely aware when other people's financial behavior didn't align with their claimed circumstances. "Weekly professional car detailing that's $200 minimum per month," Carmen began, pointing to photographs she'd taken of Sophia's consistently pristine vehicle. "Exclusive gym membership at that upscale place downtown where I can't even afford a day pass, $120 per month. Weekly nail appointments at the salon where celebrities go, $80 each visit, plus tips." She pulled out her phone and showed Penelope screenshots from Sophia's social media accounts, each image carefully dated and annotated. "Designer handbag. Last month I researched it online, $1,200. New workout clothes every week from brands that sell individual items for what I spend on groceries. Professional photography sessions for Leo's school pictures instead of the standard package that costs $25. Carmen's voice carried the controlled frustration of someone who'd been trying to warn people about danger they refused to see. "I track every penny as a single mother living on a nurse's salary. These aren't occasional luxuries for someone supposedly living on one income and asking family for help with basic expenses. This is a sustained lifestyle that requires significant, consistent funding." The social media evidence was particularly revealing. Carmen had screenshot posts showing Sophia at expensive restaurants, spa treatments, shopping excursions to high-end boutiques, and weekend getaways that would have been impossible on Marcus's salary alone, especially while requesting regular financial assistance for Leo's supposedly urgent needs. She posted about a spa day last Tuesday that included a full-body massage, facial, and manicure. Carmen continued, showing Penelope the dated post. I looked up the packages, minimum $300. That's more than I spend on groceries in a month. Someone maintaining this lifestyle has money coming from a source that isn't Marcus's paycheck. When Carmen had attempted to discuss these observations with Marcus during recent family gatherings, he'd become increasingly defensive and dismissive. Sophia deserves nice things after sacrificing her career for our family, he'd said, effectively ending conversations before they could delve into specifics. Carmen, you've never fully accepted any woman I've dated. This feels like the same pattern. But privately, Marcus was beginning to notice financial inconsistencies he'd been too trusting or too busy to examine closely. Household bills that seemed surprisingly manageable despite their supposed single-income status. Financial discussions that remained frustratingly vague when he asked for specifics. And Sophia's increasingly evasive responses when he occasionally questioned unexpected expenses. His work colleague had recently mentioned seeing Sophia at an expensive day spa during regular business hours, a detail that didn't align with her claims about spending days managing household responsibilities, Leo's schedule, and her freelance consulting work. When Marcus asked about it, Sophia's explanation came quickly. It was a one-time birthday gift from her sister in California. But Marcus realized, with growing unease, that her sister hadn't visited in over a year, and their family budget couldn't realistically accommodate such luxuries, even as gifts. The explanation felt rehearsed, like she'd been prepared for the question. He began paying closer attention to details he'd previously ignored through trust and busy work schedules. Sophia quickly closing her laptop whenever he entered rooms unexpectedly, always with explanations about planning surprises for Leo or organizing family schedules. Bills that showed paid status before his biweekly paychecks were deposited. Cash withdrawals from their joint account that were larger and more frequent than their family spending patterns should warrant. The morning after her conversation with Carmen, Penelope decided to test a growing suspicion that had been nagging at her for weeks. She drove to the downtown coffee shop where Sophia claimed to spend several days each week working on freelance marketing consulting projects. Janet Morrison, the owner, had known Penelope for nearly a decade through neighborhood association meetings and community events. She greeted Penelope warmly when she entered the bustling cafe during the morning rush. "I wanted to ask you about Sophia Chen Rivera," Penelope began carefully. "My daughter-in-law. I understand she works here part-time doing marketing consulting." Janet's expression shifted from friendly recognition to polite confusion. "Work here? Oh, honey. I definitely know Sophia. She's one of our most loyal customers. Comes in every Tuesday and Thursday, sometimes Fridays, always orders the most expensive items on our menu, specialty lattes, artisanal pastries, those imported chocolate croissants that cost $8 each. She's lovely, always well-dressed, tips generously." "Shog," Janet paused, clearly trying to be helpful while navigating potentially sensitive territory. "But she's never worked here, either as an employee or a contractor. I would absolutely remember hiring someone for marketing help. It's something I've been wanting to do but can't afford. If she'd approached me about consulting work, I would have been very interested." The casual revelation hit Penelope like a physical blow. The lie was so unnecessary, so easily discoverable, yet so confidently maintained. Sophia had been claiming to work from this coffee shop for months, using it to justify her absence from home during business hours and her need for professional workspace expenses. "She spends quite a bit of time here," Janet continued, oblivious to the impact of her words. "Usually sits at the corner table with the good lighting, always has her phone, but I don't think I've ever seen her with a laptop or work materials. Seems to spend most of her time on social media or making phone calls. Pleasant enough, but definitely not working in any professional capacity." That evening, when Penelope asked Sophia directly about the discrepancy, the explanation came smoothly and without hesitation. "I do freelance social media consulting from the cafe. It's more professional than working from home with Leo's schedule and household distractions. Clients appreciate knowing I have a dedicated workspace for our calls and strategy sessions." The response was polished, reasonable sounding, and delivered with the confident sincerity that had made Sophia's explanations believable for years. But when Penelope asked follow-up questions about specific clients, consulting projects, or business details, Sophia's answers became increasingly vague. No business cards to show, no website or portfolio to share, no concrete examples of successful campaigns or satisfied clients. The consulting income was never mentioned specifically in family budget discussions, and Sophia seemed to carry no laptop, work materials, or professional equipment during her supposed office hours at the coffee shop. "Social media consulting is mostly done through phone apps now," Sophia explained when pressed about the lack of traditional business equipment. "Everything is mobile optimized. I can manage entire campaigns from my phone, which is much more convenient than carrying around heavy equipment." Over the following weeks, Penelope began keeping detailed records of her own financial contributions to the family, documenting every request, every stated purpose, and every promised outcome. She started requesting receipts for expenses she funded, asking specific questions about how money was being used, and paying careful attention to discrepancies between claimed needs and visible lifestyle improvements. The pattern that emerged was deeply troubling. Many expenses Sophia claimed were either significantly inflated or entirely fictitious. The emergency dental work for Leo that had cost $800 pediatric dentistry didn't typically involve expensive procedures like crowns unless there was severe trauma or neglect, neither of which applied to Leo's situation. The specialized breathing equipment that required a $300 contribution for a nebulizer Leo supposedly needed for respiratory issues, except Leo had never been diagnosed with asthma or any condition requiring such equipment. When Penelope mentioned this to Marcus, he seemed genuinely surprised and said he'd never heard about Leo having breathing problems, medical expenses that didn't match any actual medical care, educational costs that exceeded what similar services cost at other providers, emergency repairs that seemed to occur with suspicious frequency. The list of questionable expenses grew longer each week. When Penelope began requesting specific documentation and receipts for these expenses, Sophia's responses shifted dramatically from grateful cooperation to defensive irritation. The change in tone was subtle but unmistakable to someone with Penelope's teaching experience. "After everything we've been through together as a family, don't you trust me to manage Leo's expenses appropriately?" Sophia asked during one particularly uncomfortable conversation, her voice carrying the wounded tone that had always been effective at ending difficult discussions. "I keep careful records of everything, but I'm surprised you feel the need to micromanage every purchase. It makes me feel like you don't have confidence in my judgment as Leo's mother." The guilt-inducing response followed a pattern Penelope was beginning to recognize. Whenever she asked specific questions about money, Sophia would respond with emotional appeals that reframed legitimate concerns as personal attacks on her character or competence as a mother and wife. But the manipulation tactics that had worked effectively for years were losing their power. Penelope's 30 years of classroom experience had taught her to recognize when students relied on emotional manipulation instead of factual explanations, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. The birthday party exclusion became the final catalyst that transformed suspicion into determination to discover the truth. Despite contributing $2,500 toward planning and expenses, despite helping coordinate details and vendors, Penelope received a last-minute phone call from Sophia explaining that venue capacity restrictions required cutting the guest list to immediate family only. "I'm so sorry, but the fire marshal was very strict about the maximum occupancy," Sophia explained, her voice carrying appropriate regret. "We had to make some difficult decisions about the guest list. It's nothing personal, just legal requirements we have to follow." But Leo's excited chatter about almost 200 people attending made it abundantly clear this wasn't an intimate gathering limited by safety regulations. Carmen was also conveniently uninvited due to the same capacity issues, despite being Leo's aunt and having attended every previous birthday celebration without incident. Standing outside the event center, watching a party she'd helped fund through glass doors, she wasn't allowed to pass. Penelope finally understood what Carmen had been trying to tell her for months. This wasn't about temporary financial hardship, family budget constraints, or unfortunate misunderstandings about venue policies. This was about systematic exclusion, financial exploitation, and the gradual erosion of her role in her grandson's life by someone who had identified her as a source of funding rather than a family member deserving of respect and inclusion. The hurt was immediate and sharp, but underneath it was something harder and more focused, the cold determination of someone who had been systematically deceived and was finally ready to discover the full scope of what had been done to her family. The meeting with Maria Santos took place in a quiet corner booth at Rosario's family restaurant, chosen specifically because the ambient noise would provide privacy for a conversation that could have serious legal implications. Maria recently retired after 25 years as a senior loan officer at First National Bank, had agreed to review Penelope's financial concerns as a personal favor, but she'd been clear about the limitations of what she could legally discuss. "Before we begin, I need to be absolutely clear about what I can and cannot do," Maria explained, her voice carrying the professional caution of someone who understood banking regulations intimately. "Federal privacy laws prevent me from accessing anyone else's account information, regardless of our friendship or family connections. What I can do is teach you how to understand your own financial records and help you recognize warning signs that might indicate fraudulent activity." Maria spread Penelope's bank statements across the table with the methodical approach of a professional who had investigated countless cases of financial irregularities during her career. Her trained eye immediately identified patterns that Penelope, despite her intelligence and life experience, had been too trusting to recognize. "These transfer patterns concern me significantly," Maria said, using her pen to trace lines between deposits and withdrawals across multiple monthly statements. "Look at this sequence: large outgoing transfers from your account, followed within 24 to 48 hours by immediate external movements to accounts you don't have access to or control over. That's a textbook indicator of pass-through fraud." She explained that legitimate family financial management would show money remaining in shared accounts or moving into clearly identified savings, education, or investment funds. When someone is genuinely managing family expenses, you see predictable patterns. Money goes into checking accounts and gets spent on documented expenses over time. You don't see this kind of immediate, systematic transfer to external accounts. Maria taught Penelope the proper procedures for requesting detailed account histories from her own bank, explaining that federal regulations required specific documentation but guaranteed account holders access to comprehensive records of their own financial activities. "You'll need to submit written requests with multiple forms of identification, but the bank is legally required to provide you with complete transaction histories for any time period you specify." She also showed Penelope how to access free annual credit reports through the federally mandated website, explaining how to interpret the information and identify unauthorized accounts or credit applications made using her personal information. Identity theft often starts with small, seemingly innocent requests for financial information, then escalates to unauthorized credit applications and account openings. "What you're describing sounds like systematic financial abuse," Maria said after reviewing the preliminary evidence Penelope had brought. "Someone has been using your financial identity and generosity in ways you didn't authorize or fully understand. We need complete, legally admissible documentation before you make any accusations, because charges like financial fraud and identity theft require absolutely irrefutable proof." Following Maria's detailed guidance, Penelope spent the next week navigating the bureaucratic process of requesting comprehensive financial records from her bank. The procedure required her driver's license, Social Security card, 2 utility bills, and a notarized letter specifically requesting 5 years of complete transaction histories for all accounts. The bank's compliance department treated her request with the seriousness it deserved, explaining that the process would take exactly 7 business days and would generate several hundred pages of documentation. "We're required to provide everything," the compliance officer explained, "but it's going to be overwhelming. You might want to have someone with financial experience help you interpret the results." When the records arrived, the scope of systematic deception they revealed was staggering. Every single one of Penelope's $47,000 in transfers designated for Leo's benefit had been immediately moved to external accounts she didn't recognize and had never authorized. The pattern was so consistent, it could only have been intentional and carefully planned. Each contribution, whether for daycare expenses, medical bills, educational costs, or emergency repairs, disappeared within hours of deposit. The money flowed through a complex network of accounts that had nothing to do with childcare, family expenses, or Leo's actual needs. Even more disturbing were the credit inquiries using her Social Security number for applications she'd never made. When Penelope called the credit card companies and loan institutions directly, customer service representatives confirmed that applications had been submitted with her information, but listing Sophia's phone number as the primary contact. According to our records, the applicant claimed to be managing financial affairs for an elderly relative. One credit card company representative explained, "The application indicated she had authorization to make financial decisions on your behalf, which is why the account was approved despite the different contact information." Piece by piece, the full scope of the systematic fraud became clear through meticulous documentation, direct transfers from Penelope's accounts to Sophia's control, $47,000 unauthorized credit card usage on cards added to Penelope's existing accounts, $8,000 personal loans using Penelope's credit history and assets as collateral, $12,000 total documented theft spanning 5 years, $67,000. Following Maria's advice, Penelope photographed every document, created a detailed chronological timeline, and began maintaining a comprehensive log of all family financial interactions going forward. The evidence was methodical, legally admissible, and painted a picture of systematic criminal activity rather than family financial mismanagement. This level of organization suggests long-term planning, Maria observed when Penelope showed her the complete documentation. Financial fraud this sophisticated doesn't happen accidentally or develop gradually. Someone researched your financial situation, identified your vulnerabilities, and executed a comprehensive plan to systematically drain your resources. Meanwhile, Marcus was conducting his own investigation into household finances he'd allowed Sophia to manage completely since Leo's birth. His decision to examine their family's financial situation more closely had been prompted by growing inconsistencies he could no longer ignore or dismiss. His closer examination revealed patterns that should have been obvious, but had been obscured by his trust and busy work schedule. Bills he assumed he was paying showed paid status before his biweekly paychecks were deposited. Mysterious transfers labeled savings that he'd never authorized and couldn't locate in any accounts he had access to. Financial movements that clearly indicated someone else was managing money he thought he controlled. When Marcus confronted Sophia about these discrepancies, her explanations were sophisticated enough to sound legitimate to someone without extensive financial knowledge. "I've been optimizing our cash flow by moving money between accounts to take advantage of better interest rates," she explained confidently. "It's called laddering you move funds to capture higher yields while maintaining liquidity for regular expenses." She also referenced automated bill pay settings you probably forgot about and joint account management strategies that sounded professional and reasonable. But Marcus realized, with growing alarm, that he'd been completely hands-off with family finances for years, trusting Sophia's claims about managing the household budget more efficiently than we could separately. His humbling discovery: he had no clear understanding of his family's actual financial situation and had been unknowingly enabling whatever Sophia was doing through willful ignorance and misplaced trust. The stress of these realizations began seriously affecting his work performance. Missing project deadlines that had never been problems before, appearing distracted during important client meetings, struggling to focus on tasks that had previously engaged him completely. His supervisor noticed the decline and scheduled a private meeting to discuss his performance concerns. "I know you're dealing with some personal issues," his supervisor said carefully, "but this is starting to impact your work quality and your team's confidence in project timelines. Is there anything the company can do to help you manage whatever's going on?" Marcus realized that the family financial situation was spiraling beyond money concerns into every aspect of his life, threatening his career and his ability to provide for Leo, regardless of what was happening with Sophia. Carmen's nursing background proved invaluable in understanding the psychological and social aspects of what was happening to their family. Her professional experience with elderly patients had exposed her to numerous cases of financial abuse, and she immediately recognized textbook patterns in Sophia's behavior. "This is systematic exploitation using classic manipulation techniques," Carmen explained to Penelope during one of their evening strategy sessions. "Financial abusers follow predictable patterns, identify vulnerable targets, establish trust and dependency, gradually isolate victims from support systems, then systematically drain resources while maintaining the appearance of legitimate family financial management." Carmen had researched elder abuse extensively through her continuing education requirements and professional development workshops. She understood the warning signs that often went unrecognized by families until significant damage had been done. Sudden changes in established financial patterns that had been stable for years. New trusted person gradually taking control of financial decisions. Victim progressively excluded from financial discussions, directly affecting them. Emotional manipulation disguised as care, concern, and family protection. Lifestyle improvements that don't align with claimed legitimate income sources. Strategic isolation from family members who might ask difficult questions. Sophia isn't protecting you or managing your finances for your benefit. Carmen concluded, after reviewing all the evidence, she's systematically protecting her access to your money while gradually erasing your role in Leo's life. She's been extraordinarily skilled at it, but the pattern is unmistakable once you know what to look for. Carmen's professional perspective helped Penelope understand that her situation wasn't unique or shameful. Elder financial abuse is unfortunately common because it exploits natural family bonds and the desire of older adults to help their children and grandchildren succeed. The criminals who do this are sophisticated and experienced. They know exactly which emotional buttons to push. Armed with comprehensive documentation and professional guidance, Penelope felt ready to confront the situation directly. But Maria had warned her repeatedly that accusations of financial fraud and identity theft couldn't be taken back once made. This will either expose criminal activity and lead to justice, or it will destroy family relationships permanently and potentially affect your access to Leo. Are you prepared for what this confrontation might do to your relationship with Marcus? Maria had asked during their final consultation. If Sophia has been lying about finances this extensively and systematically, she's almost certainly been lying about other significant things too. This isn't going to just affect her, it's going to fundamentally change everything about your family dynamics. Penelope thought carefully about Leo, about the very real possibility of losing access to her grandson entirely if the confrontation went badly, or if Marcus chose to side with his wife despite the evidence. She also thought about the pattern of gradual exclusion that had already begun, the systematic erosion of her role in Leo's life that had culminated in being banned from his birthday party. but she also thought about the other elderly people who might become Sophia's targets if she faced no consequences for her actions. The systematic nature of the fraud, the sophisticated planning, the complete absence of genuine remorse, all of it suggested that Sophia would continue victimizing vulnerable people until someone stopped her. "She'll do this to someone else," Penelope told Maria during their final meeting. "Maybe someone who can't afford to lose what she takes. Maybe someone without family members who would notice the warning signs or fight back. Maybe someone who won't survive the financial devastation the way I have." The decision crystallized. Some fights were worth the risk, some truths were worth the consequences, and some elderly people deserved better than being treated as sources of funding rather than family members worthy of respect and protection. Armed with $67,000 worth of documented evidence and the support of professionals who understood both the financial and legal implications of systematic elder abuse, Penelope prepared for a confrontation that would either restore her family or destroy it entirely. But either outcome would be better than continuing to live as a victim of systematic financial exploitation while watching other elderly people suffer the same fate. Sensing the increasing scrutiny from multiple family members and recognizing that her carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel, Sophia made a calculated decision to shift from concealment to offense. Instead of continuing to hide financial irregularities or provide increasingly complex explanations for suspicious activities, she began systematically reframing the entire situation to position herself as Penelope's protector rather than her exploiter. The transformation was subtle but comprehensive. During what appeared to be a casual conversation with Marcus after dinner one evening, Sophia presented her new version of events with the practiced concern of someone who had been carefully planning this narrative shift. "I've been worried about your mother's financial judgment lately," Sophia said, her voice carrying the perfect balance of concern and reluctance to share difficult information. "I didn't want to alarm you, but she's been making some decisions that concern me. I think she's being targeted by scammers who specifically prey on elderly people." The conversation took place in their bedroom, away from Leo's hearing, with Sophia positioned as the reluctant bearer of troubling news rather than someone desperate to deflect attention from her own criminal activities. "What kind of decisions?" Marcus asked, immediately concerned about his mother's welfare in ways that Sophia had carefully calculated would override his growing suspicions about household finances. Sophia had prepared extensively for this conversation, gathering carefully selected evidence that would support her fabricated narrative. She showed Marcus documentation she'd been collecting for weeks, charity solicitation calls that all elderly homeowners received, magazine subscription renewals with automatic billing that were standard marketing practices, online purchase confirmations for items Sophia had deliberately categorized as unnecessary or impulsive. She's been donating large amounts to organizations that call during dinner hours, Sophia explained, showing Marcus a list of legitimate charities that had contacted Penelope for donations. "Yesterday she told me she gave $300 to some wildlife conservation group she'd never heard of before the phone call. That's not like her. She used to research everything carefully." She also presented evidence of online purchases, a cookbook Penelope had ordered for Leo's birthday party, a subscription to a gardening magazine she'd maintained for 15 years, and replacement items for household goods that had worn out. Sophia reframed each purchase as evidence of declining judgment rather than normal consumer behavior. "I've been quietly managing some of her money to protect her from these predators," Sophia continued, her voice heavy with the burden of family responsibility. "I didn't want to embarrass her by discussing it directly, but I've been redirecting funds into secure accounts rather than letting scammers drain her savings." The manipulation was sophisticated and played directly into Marcus's existing guilt about not paying closer attention to his mother's welfare after Miguel's death. Sophia positioned her systematic theft as protective intervention, framing criminal activity as elder care and family responsibility. "We can't let strangers take advantage of her grief and loneliness," Sophia said. exploiting Marcus's regret about being too busy with work to spend more time with Penelope. She's vulnerable right now, and these people are experts at identifying elderly targets. I've been trying to help without making her feel like we don't trust her judgment. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Sophia carefully building a narrative that transformed months of documented financial fraud into evidence of her dedication to family protection. She suggested that Marcus help her manage Penelope's finances more formally, positioning continued theft as a loving family intervention. Maybe we should consider having a gentle conversation with her about setting up better financial safeguards, Sophia proposed. Not to control her money, but to protect her from people who would take advantage of her generosity. Marcus found himself torn between the growing evidence of financial problems that Carmen and Penelope had presented and his wife's seemingly compassionate explanation that reframed every suspicious activity as protective care. The technical nature of Sophia's financial explanations made them sound legitimate to someone without banking expertise, while her emotional appeals to family loyalty and elder protection resonated with his genuine concern for his mother. Carmen's professional perspective as a pediatric nurse provided crucial insight when Penelope shared details of Sophia's new narrative during one of their regular evening meetings. Carmen's experience with child abuse cases had taught her to recognize manipulation tactics that abusers used to justify their behavior and deflect accountability. "This is textbook manipulation," Carmen said immediately after hearing Sophia's latest explanations. "She's using classic abuser tactics, reframe the victim as the problem, position the abuse as protection, and exploit family guilt to maintain control. I've seen this exact pattern in cases where parents abuse children but convince other family members they're providing necessary discipline." Carmen explained that financial abusers typically employed these deflection strategies. When their activities came under scrutiny, they claim the elderly person is confused, making poor decisions, or being victimized by others. It's a standard technique to maintain access while appearing to be the concerned family member who's trying to help. She helped Penelope understand that Sophia's narrative shift wasn't a response to genuine concerns about Penelope's financial judgment. It was a calculated attempt to maintain control over the systematic theft that had been funding her lifestyle for years. "The fact that she's now claiming to be protecting you actually confirms that she knows her activities are wrong," Carmen explained. "If she genuinely believed she was helping manage family finances appropriately, she wouldn't need to create elaborate explanations about protection and intervention." Armed with comprehensive financial documentation and professional guidance from both Maria and Carmen, Penelope decided that the time for passive observation had ended. She arranged a formal family meeting at her house on a Sunday afternoon, choosing her home territory deliberately to maintain psychological advantage during what would inevitably be a confrontational conversation. The setting was carefully planned: her living room, surrounded by photos of Miguel and memories of better times, with Maria Santos present as both witness and financial expert. Carmen would attend for moral support and professional perspective, while Marcus would be forced to confront evidence he could no longer dismiss or rationalize away. Marcus arrived first, his appearance showing the strain of sleepless nights spent questioning everything he thought he knew about his marriage and family finances. His usual confident demeanor had been replaced by the uncertain expression of someone who suspected his entire adult life had been built on systematic deception. Carmen came prepared with her own folder of meticulously organized documentation photographs of Sophia's social media posts showing luxury purchases, receipts from her own research into the costs of services Sophia claimed as business expenses, and timeline evidence correlating Sophia's lifestyle improvements with increases in Penelope's financial contributions. Sophia arrived last, immediately sensing the formal atmosphere and serious nature of the gathering. Her usual casual confidence was replaced by defensive alertness as she noticed the documents spread across Penelope's coffee table and the presence of Maria Santos, whom she recognized as someone with professional banking expertise. "What's this about?" Sophia asked, her voice carrying the slightly defensive tone that had become her default response when family finances were mentioned during recent weeks. Penelope had rehearsed this moment extensively. Understanding that the confrontation would determine whether her family could be rebuilt on honesty or would be permanently fractured by the exposure of systematic criminal activity. She spread 5 years of bank statements across her coffee table with the deliberate precision of someone presenting evidence in a legal proceeding. "This is about where my money has actually been going for the past 5 years," Penelope said, her voice quiet but carrying the authority of someone who had done extensive research and was prepared for any response. "And it's about the systematic lies you've been telling all of us about your employment, your financial needs, and your management of Leo's expenses." Maria presented the evidence with the methodical approach of a banking professional who had investigated countless cases of financial fraud during her career. She explained each document's significance in terms that were clear to everyone present. Transfer patterns showing immediate movement of funds from Penelope's accounts to external accounts. Sophia controlled. Credit reports revealing unauthorized applications made using Penelope's personal information, and a detailed timeline correlating Sophia's undocumented income with her escalating lifestyle expenses. Every dollar Penelope contributed for Leo's expenses disappeared within hours of deposit. Maria explained, using her pen to trace the paper trail across multiple bank statements. None of this money went to childcare, medical bills, educational costs, or any legitimate family expenses. All of it was immediately transferred to personal accounts that Sophia controlled exclusively. The documentation was comprehensive and undeniable. Carmen presented supporting evidence from her own investigation's social media posts showing purchases that exceeded Marcus's entire salary, lifestyle expenses that would have been impossible on legitimate income, and evidence of systematic deception about employment and financial circumstances. Sophia's initial response followed a predictable pattern of deflection and confusion. "There must be some kind of banking error," she said, her voice carrying practiced sincerity despite the overwhelming evidence. "Automated transfers get mixed up all the time, especially when you're managing multiple accounts for different purposes." When that explanation failed to address the systematic 5-year pattern of immediate transfers to accounts Marcus had never known existed, Sophia shifted to a more sophisticated defense strategy. "I was consolidating funds for better investment returns," she claimed. "Moving money between accounts to take advantage of different interest rates and tax advantages, it's called portfolio optimization." But Marcus, faced with bank documentation showing accounts in his wife's name that he'd never authorized or been informed about, demanded explanations for financial activities that had directly used his mother's credit history and personal information without consent. "You opened credit cards using my mother's Social Security number," Marcus said. His voice barely controlled as the scope of systematic deception became clear. "You took out personal loans using her credit history as collateral. You've been systematically stealing from her for years while convincing me that you were managing our family finances responsibly." The composed facade that Sophia had maintained throughout years of systematic fraud finally began to crack under the weight of irrefutable evidence and direct confrontation from multiple family members. Her usual confident explanations gave way to emotional breakdown as she realized that her carefully constructed narrative was completely falling apart. "I was going to pay it all back," she sobbed, employing the emotional manipulation tactics that had been effective for years. "Once I got the consulting business established and profitable, once our financial situation improved, I never meant for it to go this far. I was just trying to help our family maintain the lifestyle that Leo deserves." She claimed the pressure of maintaining appearances for Marcus's career advancement, the stress of managing family finances on a single income, and the desire to give Leo the same advantages as his more affluent classmates. Her explanations positioned the systematic theft as misguided family loyalty rather than deliberate criminal activity. But Carmen's research and professional experience had prepared the family for exactly these justifications. "This isn't desperation or poor judgment," Carmen said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had dealt with manipulation tactics professionally. "This is systematic criminal fraud that required long-term planning and deliberate deception." The timeline evidence supported Carmen's harsh assessment. Sophia's financial manipulation had begun before Miguel's death and had accelerated systematically afterward, suggesting that she had identified and deliberately targeted a grieving widow rather than responding to unexpected financial pressures. "You researched Penelope's financial situation before you even married Marcus," Carmen continued, presenting evidence of Sophia's calculated approach to the relationship. "You identified her as a vulnerable target and executed a comprehensive plan to exploit her grief and generosity. This wasn't family financial management. It was predatory criminal behavior." Marcus struggled with the devastating realization that his marriage, his family life, and his understanding of his wife's character had been built on the systematic exploitation of his grieving mother. Everything he'd admired about Sophia, her devotion to family, her financial responsibility, her sacrifices for Leo's well-being had been carefully constructed lies, funded by theft from the woman who had raised him. "How long have you been planning this?" Marcus asked, his voice hollow with the understanding that his entire adult life had been built on systematic deception. "Was any of our relationship real, or was it all just a way to get access to my mother's money?" Sophia's desperation escalated as she recognized the complete loss of control over the situation she had managed so carefully for years. She began making increasingly desperate threats designed to maintain some leverage over the family dynamics and prevent the complete collapse of her position. She claimed that Marcus had known about the family financial arrangements and was legally complicit in the systematic theft. She threatened to move away with Leo if the harassment and false accusations continued, positioning herself as the victim of family persecution rather than the perpetrator of systematic fraud. Most manipulatively, she suggested that she would report Penelope to authorities for making inappropriate financial gifts that enabled elder abuse, attempting to use the legal system to punish her victim for exposing criminal activity. But the documentation was too comprehensive, the pattern too clear, and the evidence too overwhelming for manipulation tactics to be effective anymore. The systematic nature of the fraud, combined with the identity theft and unauthorized credit applications, clearly constituted serious criminal behavior that couldn't be explained away by family financial stress or poor judgment. The confrontation had exposed the truth, but it had also fractured the family in ways that would require months of work to repair, if repair was even possible after such extensive and systematic betrayal. Detective Sarah Kim had specialized in financial crimes for 12 years and had investigated numerous cases of elder abuse. But the systematic nature of Sophia's fraud and the comprehensive documentation Penelope presented made this case particularly strong from a prosecution standpoint. Financial predators typically target people they perceive as isolated and vulnerable, Detective Kim explained during their first formal meeting at the police station. Recent widows, elderly individuals with limited family oversight, people who might be confused by complex financial transactions. Your daughter-in-law clearly identified you as an ideal target and executed a sophisticated long-term plan. The formal criminal investigation began with Penelope's meticulously organized documentation, but expanded rapidly as Detective Kim's team discovered additional evidence through official channels. Bank subpoenas revealed the complete network of accounts Sophia had created using fraudulent applications, while credit agency records showed multiple unauthorized inquiries and applications made with Penelope's personal information. The investigation took 3 weeks to gather sufficient evidence for criminal charges, during which time family tensions escalated dramatically as Sophia realized the serious legal consequences approaching. She alternated between desperate apologies, promising full restitution, and angry accusations that Marcus and Penelope were destroying their family over money that had been freely given. Detective Kim's investigation uncovered evidence that transformed the case from individual fraud to a systematic criminal enterprise with multiple victims across several years. Mrs. Eleanor Walsh, a 78-year-old widow, had lost $31,000 through what Sophia described as grandchild emergency schemes before Walsh's death 2 years prior. The elderly woman's family had been too overwhelmed by grief and funeral arrangements to pursue criminal charges, and they lacked the financial sophistication to understand they'd been systematically defrauded by someone they'd trusted. Mr. Robert Kim, a 72-year-old retired teacher, had lost $18,000 through fake investment opportunities Sophia had presented through their shared volunteer work at the community senior center. He'd filed a police complaint but lacked the comprehensive documentation needed for successful prosecution, and the case had been closed due to insufficient evidence. Detective Kim's investigation revealed that Sophia had strategically volunteered at the senior center specifically to identify vulnerable potential targets. Computer files seized during the search warrant showed detailed profiles of elderly community members, including extensive financial and personal information about Penelope that had been gathered systematically before her marriage to Marcus. The scope of Sophia's criminal enterprise was chilling in its calculation, and scope she researched potential targets through newspaper obituaries to identify recent widows, assessed their financial capacity through public property records and social observation, built trust relationships through family connections or volunteer work, then systematically exploited emotional vulnerabilities for sustained financial gain. The total confirmed theft from 4 victims over 6 years exceeded $116,000. Analysis of Sophia's lifestyle and expenses revealed that she'd had no legitimate income since the startup layoffs she'd claimed were temporary, meaning her entire standard of living had been funded through elder fraud. The search warrant was executed on a Tuesday morning while Leo was at school to minimize his exposure to the traumatic scene. Marcus was present during the search, cooperating fully with investigators despite his personal devastation at seeing his home treated as a crime scene. Evidence seized included computer files containing victim profiles and detailed manipulation strategies, forged documents and false identification materials, bank records from multiple hidden accounts, and documentation of luxury purchases that far exceeded any legitimate income sources. Sophia was arrested on multiple charges including identity theft, wire fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Bail was set at $50,000 due to demonstrated flight risk and the involvement of multiple victims across several years. Social Services was contacted regarding Leo's immediate well-being, establishing temporary custody arrangements with Marcus while Sophia remained in detention. The local media attention that followed the arrest increased community awareness about elder financial abuse and prompted additional victims to contact police. Several other cases emerged from the publicity, though most were too old or poorly documented for successful prosecution. Marcus faced the emotionally devastating decision of whether to testify against his wife in criminal proceedings. He ultimately chose to cooperate fully with prosecutors, providing detailed testimony about Sophia's lies regarding employment, family finances, and the manipulation tactics she'd used to control family relationships and isolate Penelope from financial decision-making. The legal proceedings stretched over 4 months, during which Marcus filed for legal separation to protect remaining family assets and began formal divorce proceedings. The discovery process revealed the complete extent of Sophia's deception, including evidence that she'd maintained relationships with other individuals who helped identify and research potential elderly targets. Facing overwhelming documentary evidence and testimony from multiple victims, Sophia's defense attorney advised accepting a plea agreement to avoid a lengthy trial that would likely result in a more severe sentence. She pled guilty to federal wire fraud and identity theft charges, receiving a 3-year prison sentence with possibility of parole after 18 months. The court ordered comprehensive restitution for all identified victims, totaling $116,000 plus interest and legal fees. Though Elena Martinez explained that actual recovery prospects were extremely limited given Sophia's lack of legitimate assets or realistic earning capacity with a federal criminal record. During victim impact statements, Penelope addressed the court about damage extending far beyond financial loss. She didn't just steal money from elderly people who trusted her. She stole our faith in family relationships, destroyed trust that took years to build, and exploited the natural love of grandparents for their grandchildren. The financial cost is significant, but the emotional and social damage to our community is immeasurable. Mr. Kim and representatives of the Walsh family also spoke about the broader impact of elder financial abuse on families and communities, emphasizing how such crimes particularly harm society's most vulnerable members and destroy the social bonds that hold communities together. The judge noted that financial crimes targeting elderly victims warranted serious consequences despite Sophia's lack of prior criminal record, emphasizing that the systematic and calculated nature of the fraud demonstrated sophisticated criminal planning rather than momentary poor judgment. The reality of financial restitution proved disappointing, but realistic. Court-ordered payment plans extending over 10 years were largely symbolic, given that Sophia's future earning capacity would be severely limited by her federal criminal record. Asset seizure and forced sale of luxury items purchased with stolen money generated approximately $23,000 toward victim restitution. Penelope's homeowner's insurance policy covered a portion of the identity theft losses under their fraud protection coverage. Combined with the asset recovery and small insurance payments, total financial recovery reached approximately $31,000 of the $67,000 stolen from Penelope, specifically less than half of her documented losses. It was never really about recovering the money, Penelope told Elena Martinez during their final consultation meeting. It was about making sure she couldn't do this to other elderly people, and about rebuilding what she damaged in our family relationships. 6 months after sentencing, the gradual healing process was showing genuine progress despite ongoing challenges. Marcus had completed divorce proceedings and gained full legal custody of Leo, making the difficult decision to move into a smaller home near Penelope and Carmen to rebuild their support network and share childcare responsibilities. Leo's adjustment to his mother's absence required ongoing professional intervention. Regular child therapy sessions helped the 8-year-old process his mother's incarceration without completely demonizing her in ways that might damage his psychological development. Age-appropriate explanations focused on, "Mommy made serious mistakes and needs time to learn better choices," rather than detailed discussions of criminal behavior that would be inappropriate for a child. School counselors reported gradual but consistent improvement in Leo's behavior and academic performance over the months following his mother's sentencing. The stability of living with his father and maintaining regular, positive contact with both grandmothers provided the emotional security he needed to heal from the trauma of family dissolution. Marcus attended individual therapy to process his complex guilt about enabling Sophia's criminal behavior through years of inattention to family finances and dismissal of Carmen's legitimate concerns. Rebuilding honest relationships with Carmen and Penelope required difficult conversations about family communication patterns, trust, and the responsibility all adults bear for protecting vulnerable family members. Weekly family dinners resumed with Marcus, Leo, Penelope, and Carmen gathering for meals that included age-appropriate discussions about money management, family relationships, and decision-making processes that had been absent during the years of deception. The transparency was healing for adults who had lived with systematic lies and manipulation. Penelope's transformation from isolated victim to community advocate became the most positive long-term outcome of the ordeal. She joined Elena Martinez's elder law practice as volunteer coordinator for their financial abuse prevention program, using her experience to help other elderly victims understand their legal rights and available options for protection and recovery. The support group that formed around the prevention program included Maria Santos providing community banking education workshops, Carmen offering guidance about health-related scams that target elderly patients, and Elena providing legal information about protective strategies and early warning signs of financial abuse. The final scene of Penelope's story played out on a Wednesday evening 6 months after Sophia's sentencing, when she received a phone call from a woman suspecting her daughter-in-law of systematic financial abuse. Instead of feeling re-victimized by hearing another familiar story of elder exploitation, Penelope found herself positioned as an experienced advocate ready to provide guidance and hope. Elder Financial Protection Network, this is Penelope Rivera. She answered with confidence she'd never imagined possible after years of manipulation and abuse. I understand you're concerned about your family's financial situation. Let me help you understand your legal options and show you how to properly document what's happening. You're not alone in this situation, and what's happening to you is not your fault. She listened carefully to the caller's story, another elderly widow, another manipulative family member, another systematic pattern of financial exploitation disguised as family care and concern. But this time, instead of being the confused and isolated victim, Penelope was the experienced voice of hope and practical guidance. The first thing you need to understand, she continued, pulling out a notebook to begin documenting another case, is that what you're describing isn't normal family financial stress or poor money management. It's systematic abuse, and there are specific laws designed to protect elderly people from exactly what you're experiencing. Let's start by teaching you how to document everything properly so you'll have the evidence you need. As she spoke with authority born from painful experience, Penelope could see Leo through her kitchen window, playing in the backyard with the remote-controlled helicopter she'd finally been able to give him properly. Marcus was preparing dinner while Carmen set the table. All of them together for a normal family evening that would have been impossible during the years of systematic deception. The money might never be fully recovered, and the betrayal would always carry a sting. But something far more valuable had been restored, a family built on honesty instead of exploitation, transparency instead of manipulation, and the powerful knowledge that victims could transform into protectors with the right support, documentation, and determination to seek justice. Here's exactly what we're going to do, Penelope told the caller, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived the worst and emerged stronger. First, we gather comprehensive evidence using proper legal procedures. Then we get professional help from people who understand elder financial abuse. And then we make absolutely sure this never happens to you again. The conversation continued for over an hour. Two women separated by geography, but united by shared experience, working together to build something stronger and more meaningful than what had been broken by betrayal. They discussed documentation strategies, legal resources, family dynamics, and the emotional challenges of confronting people they had loved and trusted. I kept thinking it was my fault, the caller admitted, that I was being too generous, too trusting, too involved in their lives. That's exactly what they want you to think, Penelope replied, remembering her own journey from self-blame to empowerment. Financial abusers are experts at making their victims feel responsible for the abuse, but loving your family and wanting to help them succeed doesn't make you responsible for their decision to steal from you. That's entirely on them. As the evening progressed, Penelope found herself sharing not just practical advice, but genuine hope. She explained how the legal system could provide protection and consequences, how family relationships could heal after confronting difficult truths, and how communities could work together to prevent elder financial abuse through education and mutual support. Will I ever get my money back? The caller asked the question that had consumed Penelope's thoughts for months during her own case. You might recover some of it, Penelope answered honestly, but I've learned that the real victory isn't financial recovery. It's reclaiming your dignity, protecting other potential victims, and rebuilding relationships based on honesty instead of manipulation. The money was important, but it wasn't the most valuable thing they tried to take from you. Outside her window, the normal sounds of family life continued. Leo's laughter as he mastered increasingly complex maneuvers with his helicopter. Marcus and Carmen's easy conversation as they prepared dinner together. The peaceful routine of people who no longer had to navigate around lies and hidden agendas. Penelope smiled as she continued taking detailed notes about another case that would require careful investigation, professional guidance, and community support to resolve successfully. This was what victory actually looked like, not perfect justice or complete financial recovery, but the power to transform pain into protection, isolation into community, and vulnerability into strength. "Before we hang up," Penelope said, "I want you to know that taking this first step, reaching out for help instead of suffering in silence, is the bravest thing you could have done. It's also the most important step, because it means you've decided to fight back instead of just enduring the abuse." The woman's voice was stronger when she replied, "I was so scared to call. I thought maybe I was imagining things, or making too big a deal out of family financial stress." "You weren't imagining anything," Penelope assured her. "And you're not making too big a deal out of systematic theft disguised as family financial management. Trust your instincts. They brought you to this phone call, and they're going to help you through whatever comes next." After they hung up, Penelope sat quietly in her kitchen for a few minutes, reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed in less than a year. 12 months ago, she had been an isolated widow being systematically robbed by someone she'd loved and trusted, excluded from family events she'd helped fund, gradually erased from her grandson's life by a woman who saw her only as a source of money. Tonight, she was a respected community advocate, a loving grandmother with regular access to Leo, a mother rebuilding honest relationships with her adult children, and a voice of hope for other elderly people facing similar exploitation. The transformation hadn't been easy. It had required courage, professional help, family support, and a willingness to pursue justice even when the personal cost was high. But it had been worth every difficult moment, worth the confrontations, the legal proceedings, the family upheaval, and the financial losses. Because the alternative, continuing to live as a victim, enabling criminal behavior, and allowing other elderly people to suffer the same exploitation, had become unacceptable once she understood what was really happening. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, Leo balanced on his shoulders and giggling with delight. "Mom, dinner's ready." Carmen made her famous enchiladas, and Leo helped with the Spanish rice. "I used real saffron, Grandma," Leo announced proudly. "Aunt Carmen taught me how to measure it properly." Looking at her grandson healthy, happy, secure in a family built on honesty, Penelope felt the deep satisfaction of knowing she'd made the right choices, no matter how difficult they'd been at the time. Leo would grow up understanding that families protect each other through truth-telling, not through enabling lies. He would learn that love doesn't require accepting abuse, and that standing up for what's right sometimes means confronting people you care about. "I'll be right there," Penelope said, saving her notes from the phone call and closing the folder that contained contact information for 3 other elderly abuse cases she was helping coordinate. "Just finishing up some community work." As she joined her family around the dinner table, a real family dinner with honest conversation, shared responsibilities, and genuine affection, Penelope thought about the phone call that had started this evening. Tomorrow, she would help another elderly person begin the journey from victim to survivor. Next week, there would be another case, another opportunity to transform pain into protection. The work would continue, one phone call at a time, one family at a time, one community education workshop at a time. Because elder financial abuse thrived in silence and isolation, but it couldn't survive in communities where people looked out for each other, where warning signs were recognized and reported, and where victims knew they had support for fighting back. Sitting around the table with Marcus, Leo, and Carmen, sharing a meal prepared with love instead of manipulation. Penelope understood that this was what healing looked like, not the absence of pain or the recovery of everything that had been lost, but the presence of honest relationships, meaningful work, and the knowledge that suffering could be transformed into service. The remote-controlled helicopter sat on the counter nearby, a symbol of gifts given with genuine love instead of calculated manipulation. Leo would play with it after dinner, probably trying to land it on Carmen's head while she pretended to be annoyed. Normal family chaos, normal family joy, built on the solid foundation of truth instead of the shifting sands of lies and financial abuse. Some battles were worth fighting, some truths were worth the consequences, and some phone calls really could change everything. Penelope had learned all of these lessons the hard way, but she'd learned them completely. And now she was ready to help others learn them too, one conversation at a time, until no elderly person had to face financial abuse alone. The conversation, the community, and the commitment to protection would continue, growing stronger with each person who chose courage over silence, truth over manipulation, and justice over enabling. That was Penelope's legacy now, not the money she'd lost, but the people she would help save from losing theirs. And that, she thought, as Leo's laughter filled the kitchen, was worth everything.